and to our discussion. First of all, I want to recommend two books. I want to do it from the outset. The first one, this is all related to practice, because truly practice is all there is. Because talent is overrated. There is such a thing as talent. I'm not saying there's not, but in any endeavor, in any excellence that we accomplish, talent is the least part of it, the absolute least. And the truly greatest world-class performers, the LeBron Jameses of the world, I won't start making a list, but there's many who start with more than their fair share of talent. But if they achieve excellence, it's because they're working harder than anyone else, and they're not just resting on natural abilities. This is true of not just the arts. Of course, in performing, it relates to that, but it's in every way. I'll also recommend this. I guess the white ones don't show up, do they? This is Outliers: The Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell. He touches on the rule that essentially to become proficient at something requires 10 years or 10,000 hours. And when it comes to our spiritual practices and our creative processes, I think the most important thing to remember is nothing we do is in order to arrive somewhere, to attain something. When it comes to spiritual things, and I mentioned this to LaDonna yesterday, there's a concept in Western religion where things are conferred upon you. You ask for something, it's given to you. You're made something by believing certain things, which is such a ridiculous concept. But by doing certain things or believing certain things, you become something. And I just completely disagree with that and think it all comes down to our practices. I can say that, like the quote I read in the last session, my religion is very simple. My religion is kindness. The Dalai Lama said that. I believe that. I try to practice that. But that's only reality when I do manage to practice that. All the times when I don't practice that, that means that's bullshit. I'm not doing it. I'm just wanting to do it, or just thinking about doing it, or believing. And of course, the worst thing is when I have the self-deception to convince myself I'm doing it when I'm really not. So to me, everything comes down to what we actually do. And in spiritual practices, like say yoga, there's a yoga mat right over there. There's also a pillow for meditating. Those sitting over there is nothing, does nothing, is nothing. But if I practice, if I roll that mat out, or if I sit on that pillow, and to be honest, most of the meditation I do is in this comfortable ass chair right here, not on the floor. But it's only when I'm practicing it that anything is happening. And so I think that if we could have a paradigm shift and really change the way we think and come to this notion that practice is all, it is absolutely all, then we will get to where we were really wanting to all along. But there's no shortcut that says, bippity boppity boo, this is what you are now. It's actually in my daily practice, I am becoming this, and I'm becoming it to the extent that I practice it. We talked about compassion in the last session. I am a compassionate person when I practice compassion. And I am not a compassionate person when I'm not practicing compassion. And to me, it is that straightforward and simple. And when it comes to creative processes, it's the same thing. I started writing, well, obviously I was writing, most of my life, but I became serious about becoming a novelist in the summer of 1994. And I can tell you when that happened, that there was something that shifted in me, and all my efforts prior to that were, false starts and, but something clicked in 94. And I just finished my graduate degree, and I'd been spending a lot of time in academic writing, and I took the same amount of time and focused it on my fiction, and it clicked. It worked for the first time. And the stuff I wrote it was shit. It was so bad, but I practiced and I practiced and I practiced and I practiced. And 26 years later, is that the math? Is that right? I can write a novel. I can write some prose that is pretty decent. And if you compare that to then, it's I would hope you would think it's not even the same person writing. I think you'd say, okay, that special ed kid is not doing too bad for what's there, but compared to where I am now, that it's something different. This beautiful thing right here, after the hurricane, I just serendipitously out of the blue, out of nowhere, I picked up the guitar, and I picked up, my son had a Walmart guitar, and I asked him if I could borrow it, and I started playing. The electricity was out, our world was absolute chaos. And I started learning some chord shapes, and the G and the D and the E minor and that. And some I remembered because I played around a little bit at the end of high school and college, but back then, I couldn't even play a song. When I started, I was crap. Now I'm just 2 years later, less crap, but I have practiced every single day. And I'm not good. I'm not proficient. I hope in 8 more years, maybe to be, but I could gig for you for probably 2 hours and not repeat a song. And that, I couldn't do that 2 years ago. I couldn't do a single song. And it all comes down to practice. And I could sit around saying, God, I would love to be able to play the guitar. I could read books about it. I could think about it. I could watch others do it. But until I start practicing it, it's nothing. It does not amount to anything. So one final thing I'll say is that I play a lot of basketball. Love basketball, and I have loved it my entire life, and I've played it my entire life. And I'm in a league team. I also play pickup about 3 or 4 nights a week, and play with most of the guys I play with are about half my age. And invariably, somebody will say, how'd you get that jump shot? How'd you get that fadeaway? How did you? And I tell them, in 40 years, if you'll practice like I've been doing for 40 years, that's what it takes. That's what it takes to get somewhere. You don't start with it, or if you start with something that's very little, but the time you put in and the effort and the focus and attention to practicing is what makes the difference. And in all the things that are important to us, compassion, kindness, morality, spirituality, whatever it happens to be, creativity, if we'll just set our intention to, every single day, I make a list of the stuff. I guess you can't see it. I'm of a list of things that I want to accomplish that day, and I try to accomplish them. I try to practice them, and I check it off and move to the next thing. And that's what it takes. And the efforts we put in are cumulative. So when I picked up the guitar 2 years ago, I did remember how to do a G and a D and an E minor from learning in the few chords in high school. And so every little bit, and it wasn't much, but the little bit of effort I put back in there, it was part of what I'm doing now. And every time I'm compassionate, and every time I am open and receptive and, die to my ego, and every time I practice those things, I get a little better. But consistency in practice is what makes the difference. So I would like to ask LaDonna to introduce herself and then jump in and share what you would like to on this subject.
Okay. I think I'm going to skip the introduction. I think everybody pretty much heard last time, but Also, Michael, you just stole pretty much everything I had written down to say. I'm going to repeat
Hey,
some of
go.
it, but I
He's an
totally
asshole for
agree.
going first. Sorry.
So the first thing that I had written down that I wanted to talk about is that having a spiritual practice, in my experience, I have found works best when I am, as you said, practicing it for its own sake and not looking for a particular result, like fixing something about myself or improving something about myself. And that's one reason, as you already mentioned this practice too, why I love doing yoga, because that is the main premise behind yoga. Any good yoga teacher will emphasize to their students that the practicing of it is really the whole point, not perfecting the poses. In fact, there really is no such thing as perfecting a pose, because of the fact everybody's body's different, the pose is going to be different for everybody's body, which is also why I love yoga, because it's so individualized. So a good yoga teacher will also encourage this is another thing I love about it, they will encourage their students to put in their absolute best effort without becoming attached to a specific outcome. So in other words, you're not working so hard for an outcome, you're just working so hard for the discipline of working so hard. And not to consider it a failure if you can't make your body move into a certain pose or position the way you want it to, or you can't go as deeply into some position that you want to. Yoga is not competitive at all, and there is no final goal or levels to move through. You simply practice it, as Michael was talking about, for the sake of practicing it. Basically, consistently showing up and doing it is the key. And like he said, the results then become cumulative. And I think that's important that we have a regular spiritual practice like that, whether it's yoga or something else, because so much in our lives is based on an outcome or how much we produce. And then we've learned to base our whole self-esteem on that. The whole thing in America and Western culture of we are what we do, not who we are. So we should put that whole thing to the side as much as we can when we're talking about having a spiritual practice. So a healthy spiritual practice is finding one that works for you, because if it doesn't work for you, then you're not going to be consistent with it. And consistency is the key to getting the benefits of any spiritual practice. The next thing I want to talk about is something called muscle memory. And I think that in spirituality, that works exactly like it works in your body. When people train in the military and they go to target practice, they're taught to aim at the head or the chest, and they do it over and over and over again, because the commanding officers, what they know that in the heat of the moment, in the middle of battle, you don't have a lot of time to think or reason about what you're doing. In a battle scenario, there's that split second that determines whether you live or you die. So that's why they teach these soldiers the repetition of doing the same action over and over and over, so that in the middle of combat, they don't have to think. It just comes back to them because they've done it so many times. So it's the same concept with athletes, like Michael was talking about. If you want to get good at basketball, you got to spend a lot of time out in your yard throwing free throws. Same thing, swinging a golf club, baseball bat, whatever. It's that it accomplishes that repetition over and over strengthens those particular muscles, and it also puts those movements in your muscle memory, so that in that heat of the moment, then you can go back to that and you don't have to think about it that much. Okay, so same thing. When we're consistent with some sort of spiritual practice, no matter what it is, then when a stressful event occurs in your life, you're less likely to fall apart, because your emotions, just like your physical muscles, have been built up cumulatively over the time that you've been practicing. And they just you go back to that fallback position of whatever spiritual practice it is that you've been doing, without really even having to think about it, because there's not a whole lot of time to think about it when you're in stress mode. So the final thing that I want to say is that, to me, people don't often think about this as being a spiritual practice, but to me, in my opinion, the practice of simply being happy for no particular reason is one of the best spiritual practices ever. A lot of us believe, whether we believe this consciously or subconsciously, that in order to be happy, there has to be some sort of outside stimulus that made you happy, that happiness is a reaction to something that has happened. But happiness is actually something, we're talking about creative processes. Happiness is something you can create. It's something that you can cultivate and you can practice. Happiness and peacefulness, I believe, is our default setting. Now, we've lived so much in this Western culture in a stress-filled environment, we forget that. But our nature is to be happy. We want to be happy. So it's possible to turn that idea on its head, and instead of waiting for some event to happen to make you happy, that you are happy in reaction to, you can be happy, and then those good things will start happening. It's the law of attraction. I have a good friend who always says, get happy and see what happens. And so I have found that that pretty much works for me, as simple as it sounds, that if you just feel the feeling of happiness first, that will kind of set this domino effect in your life of good things coming to you. So whether people think that it's a spiritual practice or not, for me, over the last few years, especially in all of everything we're going through as a collective, I have found that if I will focus on just being happy for no reason as a spiritual practice, it works for me. So that's what I have to say.
Excellent. Thank you. So good. Carrie? You there? Do we still have Carrie?
I was just jotting a note down.
Okay, cool.
Wonderful, thank you. That's so wonderful that you just were talking about that, LaDonna. I just happened to be a few minutes ago just watching a video talking about that very fact, that happiness you shouldn't outsource it. You shouldn't rely upon others to bring you that happiness, or circumstances to bring you that happiness. It's really something you should cultivate within yourself. It resides within you. Maybe we'll talk about that when we do a little meditation later. But absolutely. So again, my name's Carrie, and I suppose the two paths of spirituality that I have walked along would be Christianity and yoga. I follow Jesus the best I can. I think he's a great guy. Did a lot of wonderful things. He's given us a lot of great advice. And then I practice yoga. And through the Yoga Sutras, I've learned that you can even practice yoga without even having a mat or asana. You can just be in a yogic way. And so, and this is, I love the way everything we say seems to really all come together and really yoke together. When we practice with enthusiasm, without a break, frequently, over a long period of time, this is really how we establish our practice and mature in our spirituality. And in yoga, it's the same way. When I was studying my yoga, I did see a lot of meshing of scripture from the Bible with the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras, these other texts. And so what I would like to just share with you are just a few principles, really the first couple of limbs of yoga. Yoga has 8 limbs, of which really I think most people focus on the third limb, which is the asana. I have it all marked. Where'd it go? I took my bookmark out. Oh, there it goes. And I wanted to just share some principles of the first 2 limbs of yoga that really, again, require no mat. So we have the yamas, which from my interpretation, I would say that the yamas are more of an outward action or attitude about the world, about the circumstances. And then we have the niyamas, which is more of inner practices to freedom, to spiritual growth. And then we pursue the other limbs, asana, which is posture, pranayama, which is breath control, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, which I have ventured into some of those limbs, but I could definitely say, making it all the way to dhyana, which is meditation. I've never been able to really attain that samadhi, which is really the super consciousness where maybe that's where Buddha made it too. It's not me though. But again, because it's a practice, maybe I'll get there. I don't know, but I do love the journey. I love the practice. For the yamas, as mentioned, it's the your attitude of what's happening outside of you, the external world, and what you bring or what you give to the world. So the yamas are ahisma, which is non-violence. And then we have satya, truthfulness, asteya, non-stealing, brahmacharya, which is continence, which really means to conserve your energies and efforts for endeavors that are productive and produce good things, that it just avoids you to expend energy in a non-productive manner. And then non-greed. And so, these are these external things that you can, I guess you kind of have an experience with the external world. And so how can we cultivate those attitudes? And then to do so, we draw inward and start to cultivate, purity, contentment, acceptance, study, and even worship. And so these are things very personal to ourselves. We can obviously practice them with others, but really it's going to be our own practice. It's going to mean the most to us. And so I always come back to the yamas and the niyamas for guidance to help kind of bring me back to myself so that I'm not, well, sometimes I get to be like a little green monster, I guess, and I let the external world dictate to my happiness. I let the external world dictate even my own behavior. And when I come back to these studies without break, frequency, with enthusiasm, that's when I feel what to me is spirituality, is the pursuit of peace, really. I love what you said, LaDonna, not to fix something, but just to feel peace through the practice.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really, at this point, would like to open it up. Did anybody have anything they would like to add or share or ask? No one has to, and we have more to share, but I just wanted to see if anybody has something they'd like to say. Anybody at all?
Hi, I'm Vanessa. Thank you so much, you guys. This is a wonderful topic. I just wanted to share that I guess the silver lining in this terrible, terrible pandemic is that I've been given a lot more time. And as part of that, I've made meditation, prayer, and trying to have a consistent contact with something greater than myself, a big part of my daily, when I get up in the morning, a big part of my practice. And I feel so much better for it. I thought meditation was not within my realm because I thought it meant that I had to clear my mind, and I have so much chatter that I just felt like a failure on and on every time I tried to do this practice. And then I stumbled onto mindful meditation and found out that the goal wasn't to clear my mind, but because thinking is what minds do, but that it was to become aware of how my mind works and that I could gently guide my mind from those thoughts back to breathing or back to sounds or whatever it is I'm doing in my meditation. And I was no longer a failure. I could do that. And so that's been an awesome thing that I can actually practice. And that keeps me in the present moment. And as I get better with it, I feel that oneness. But anyway, I just love the topic, and that it's about practice. Because I gave up on that a long time ago, thinking that I couldn't do it. But I found a way that makes sense for me, and I can do it now. So, and that's the one thing I've been doing with this pandemic. That's all I got.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, the quality of practice is not nearly as important as the consistency. Anyone else?
I just wanted to add to what Vanessa just said, that there's a quote that I love that it took me a long time to learn this and figure this out. But the quote is, "Your mind makes a wonderful servant, but a terrible master." And a lot of times we so identify with our mind, we forget. My brother, who's the pastor of our church now, he likes to say that we are not our thoughts. And this was not original with him. He read it from Wayne Dyer and many other people who have said it. But we are not our thoughts. We are the being capable of having the thoughts. But we have so identified with our thoughts, with our ego, that it becomes our master. And that's what meditation to me is all about, is just remembering that you're not your thoughts. You have thoughts, but that's not what you are. You are the being capable of having the thoughts, and you have to learn to use your mind and thought processes as a tool rather than living your whole life in service to your thoughts.
Absolutely. I am the thinker, not the thoughts. And the book I mentioned in the last session, This is Water, by David Foster Wallace, he talks about that a lot. And he was someone who struggled with that, who his mind was often the master. And he tried his best to make it the slave. And that book is a part of that process. And they talk about how when someone commits suicide by actually shooting themselves in the head, that it has so much to do with how much their mind is the master, is being their enemy. And it's not a coincidence that is what they're attacking. That is what they're dealing with. Now, I highly recommend that book. Like I said, it's so small, but in meditation, in these practices, we can suck at them. I do. I'm not good at any of them, but in doing them, we do make small gains, small strides, and it does make those daily practices make our days all the better. Our egos are just our enemies, and they tell us we have to do things in certain ways, and we have to be good, and we are great or perfect. That shouldn't even be the goal. We should. The practice is the thing. And LaDonna mentioned, detaching from the outcome. And if we want to find peace in life, if we could, of course, practice detachment, unattachment, in every way, but particularly with the outcome. If the Tao Te Ching says the master does her work and then she steps back. If we can do that, if that can be our practice, where we do our thing, whatever it is, and then we just step back and it's done. When I write a novel and I do the best I can, then I step back, I release it into the world, and I'm done with it. I have nothing else to do with it. And it's its own thing now. And I have no control. It can become a bestseller. It can be loved by the critics or hated by the critics. It can be, loved by my, constant readers or hated by them. And I have no control over that. And letting go of attachments and especially the outcomes, is letting go of control, or our illusion of control. Anyone else have something they'd like to add? Please, especially if you haven't said anything yet, please don't hold back.
I can say something. I don't know what I want to say exactly, except that I keep thinking about intention in this. And, you know, I think you started, Michael, by saying you set your intention every single day, and how important that is for me in coming out of whether it's just spiritual practice or creative process or practice, but this idea that the intention isn't a goal, you know, isn't for me, it's not a specific goal, but it's an intention, I guess, to act, or an intention of process, or an intention of mind. And it's something that's just, I don't know, that's why I say I don't know exactly what I want to say, but it's just this feeling that's coming out of it, this difference between sort of the things that you want to accomplish, and when you're setting these intentions for yourself daily, that it's not about what you want to achieve, but it's about how you want to be, you know, and how you want that practice to sort of unfold in that day. Yeah.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I couldn't agree more. I think the sort of toxic masculinity that sort of rules our culture is very much goal oriented and accomplishing. You know, we're building these things, we're doing these things, and we're slapping our name on them, and we're, you know, all of those. And you're right. If we just set our intention to practicing, just, you know, and what happens, who cares? What, you know, what it results in. I think that's really important for us to remember. Anyone else?
Speaking about meditation, I think Vanessa was talking about it. Something that I found really helpful, because it was hard for me at first as well, because I have a very active mind. I listened to something Esther Hicks said one time. She said, you know, when she first started meditating, she said she would set a timer. And I think she started like at 5 minutes, and then she started increasing it. But she said what she would do, and what she recommends to everybody that is just starting a meditation practice, is set a timer and then just do it for that amount of time. And when the timer goes off, even if you don't feel like you've accomplished, you know, whatever it was, that state of peaceful mind where your thoughts are gone, just stop and go about your day, and don't have any guilt, and then do it again the next day. And the more you do it, the easier it will become. Another thing I want to say is what Michael just said. I've been studying a lot and listening to a lot of people talk recently about the masculine versus the feminine, which, you know, it doesn't really have anything to do with gender. We all have both masculine and feminine within us. So somebody said the other day that I felt was so significant was the feminine is the inspiration and the creation. We see that even in your biology. We are the sex that creates. But then the masculine comes along and defines it, or builds around it, protects it. So what has happened, I believe, one of the reasons why our whole society is way out of balance is that whole feminine inspiration creation thing has been ignored, and the masculine has just tried to build, like Michael said, slap, you know, produce, and have totally left out the feminine. Now, wait a minute. Let's have something of substance before we start building around it. So that was a great point, that we all have to learn how to balance the masculine and feminine within ourselves, so that it can then be reflected to the general collective.
Absolutely. And you think about muses, you know, muses are feminine, you know, and that creative process is, and you're right. We all have both. And getting in touch with both and honoring both. And unfortunately, and it's not just masculine versus feminine, but in general, you know, going back to our day of music, with everybody wanting to rule the world, those who are wanting to rule the world, those who are the loudest, those who are trying to force things to happen politically, economically, and, you know, in every way, are often not honoring the feminine, and a lot of times they're not even honoring true good masculinity. It's something else entirely, and it's so ego driven. And for us to detach from that and look within ourselves to honor both, and to enjoy what this is about, the process is all, you know, what it results in. First of all, I mean, the less control we have over that, I think the better. And I'm looking at some very talented artists, and I know I've looked at your work. I've discussed your process with you. I know that the joy is in the doing. The joy is in the creating, and I think our lives should be like that. And if I stop focusing on what I accomplish or what something means or some goal or fixed point out there I'm trying to arrive at, and just enjoy the process, the journey. If I'll enjoy the journey, and the best trips we take are when we enjoy the journey, not when I am rushing to get to the destination. And that's all that matters is the destination and getting there by a certain time. And just think about the difference in approach. And I think our lives are so much better if we'll just enjoy the process. Anybody want to share? Sarah, how about mentioning something about the creative process or anything you want to say?
I fear that if I share now, I'll have nothing to share next program. So I might hold tight. Otherwise, it might get a little repetitive. But I think everyone has been fantastic and phenomenal. And I have been really enjoying everyone's home spaces. My office is horrible, but everyone else's home space is so relaxing, which I think is also something that can calm and get yourself into the right mindset.
Oh, I didn't mention this to you earlier, but when this is over, we're going to have a after party at Vanessa's place. So we'll meet over there when we're done here.
I was going to say, and if you don't find your home space relaxing, you can create whatever space you want.
Yeah, I for some reason, every time I try the green screen, it just like cuts my head off and weird things, my hair disappears. So I haven't mastered that yet.
Well, I have to admit, I'm not at my house. I'm at my brother and sister-in-law's house, specifically because they have a better background than I have.
Same here. I said it before. My house is a wreck, so it's no. There's no. I was like, what am I gonna do? Put a bunch of plants in the corner, and then maybe kind of camouflage it. I don't know. I came to my office and I was like, it's in good shape. So you guys were just talking about enjoying the journey, and it just makes me think about as an educator. A lot of times students, regardless of whatever kind of student is, but for me, it's like really important when I'm with my science majors, since I'm a science educator. You know, a lot of times, well, what do I need to know for the test? And I'm like, well, that's not really what's important. I mean, it is, obviously, you want to have good grades and have good transcripts. And yes, you do want that diploma. But what is it that you're trying to gain from taking this class? You're trying to gain some biological literacy. And I unfortunately find a lot of students wanting to not put in that practice, not put in that work, and just get the grade. And it does not serve them well, because as they practice, as they work, as they study, they become a student. It's not just about the content that they're learning. It's about being able to learn. I was actually in a meeting with other educators the other day, and we were talking about virtual learning compared with face-to-face classes. And someone mentioned that they were like, well, you know, my opinion of virtual learning is this. And they did not have a good opinion of it. And they said that's just garbage. And I was just like, but once you get out of college, how do you learn? You learn virtually, you learn remotely, you teach yourself. You have to be able to do that. And that's what you're really supposed to be doing as a student in college, is learning how to be a learner, learning how to be a student. Because if you master that, you really can learn anything, I think. Anything that you have the affinity for. So I'm trying to figure out how to nurture and cultivate the appreciation in my students, that journey, the work that they have to do in my courses. Focus on that, not so much on the outcome. I love that you brought that up, that attachment to the outcome, that let that go. Be in your biology class for the sake of becoming biologically literate, and then, understanding why that is so important for our society. I mean, think about, like, right now, I wish more people were biologically literate and understood viruses a little more, if you know what I'm saying. So that's it. Thank you.
Carrie, your talk reminded me just that the joy and curiosity and like kind of nurturing that, especially with biology, but being curious.
Try relevancy. I try to find things that are very relevant and interesting so that I can try to bring that curiosity out in the student. Instead of just telling them to read a textbook and listen to my lecture, let's do something that's meaningful.
Carrie, what you shared was so good, so relevant. In my college careers, I was lucky enough that I had parents that saw that. It wasn't that I was going there to get a job. They said, your job is to learn and to learn critical thinking. You will be a student for life. And that's how I feel. I'm a student of life and for life.
That's, if we're failing anywhere, it's in not teaching students to be students for life. I mean, most of us, you know, the best outcome of college, of school, but of going to college is to learn how to learn. Like you said, I mean, and if we get the skills of learning, of critical thinking, of being able to, you know, and of staying curious, as Sarah mentioned, then I have 2 degrees. I have learned a billion times more since I got finished with those degrees than I ever did sitting in those classrooms or going through, you know, but the best teachers, and they always say the best teachers are teaching you who they are more than anything else. That's the transference is themselves. And if they can teach you to love learning and how to learn, and the best teachers do that, then they're equipping you for your real education, which begins when the teachers get through with you.
For years, I was in charge of all of our children's ministries at our church, and we had a fairly big, we had like 400 kids there every Sunday morning. And so I was having a lot of trouble getting parents to come volunteer to teach. And I always, because they said, oh, I'm not a teacher. I said, well, you don't have to be. And my statement that I kept telling them, whether it's in a church setting or an academic setting, is basically, you are the curriculum. It's like, if the kids come, you show them love, you make them feel comfortable, they want to come back, you've done your job, whether you followed your lesson plan or not. So yes, I truly believe that in teaching, in whatever setting, the teacher is much more the curriculum than any facts you will share with your students.
I sometimes like to consider myself more of a facilitator. Yeah, the act of learning is better. Yeah.
You think the same is true of the best counselors? You know, they are facilitating you coming to your insights, coming to your truths, you know. And when I first started, when I wanted to be a novelist, I started reading everything I could find, including like great literature, but also how-to books, watching videos, anything I could. I started taking classes. The other thing I started doing was asking successful novelists, how do you do this? And not a single one of them could tell me. And it was true in this endeavor, and it's true in everything. We have to figure out how to do what we're wanting to do. And it is deeply personal and idiosyncratic. You know, my process is only mine, and nobody can give it to me. There's certainly people can give you guidance, and people can say, hey, this works for me. You might want to try this. And even if it works for you, it's probably going to be some version of it works for you. And that's so in everything, we are responsible. I'm responsible for my education. I'm responsible for learning and growing and evolving and becoming. I'm responsible for that curriculum. I'm responsible for figuring out how to do it. I'm responsible for keeping myself curious of probably the most important thing you mentioned, Vanessa, I think you mentioned earlier, beginner's mind, but the most important thing I'm responsible for is not knowing, is letting go of everything I think I know so I can relearn. And like in writing a book, relearning how to write a book every single time you start a new book, trying to learn how to meditate every single time I try to meditate, and on and on and on. It's just a process, and it's just figuring out what processes work for us. Developing good habits. That's what it comes down to. Having a process, having systems that we can fall back on, but being consistent in doing them, I think is the most important thing we can do. Any final comment before we wrap up? Anybody have anything else they want to share? We have a few minutes. Please feel free to, if you want to. Don't hold back.
I will say I do love, I do feel being a teacher, it really helps to, it allows me to be creative, because I have to create stuff. I mean, I could use other people's stuff if I wanted to, but I feel like if I were to try to, lecture from somebody else's slideshow, or just use all of, some canned curriculum or something like that, I don't feel like I'm really, for me, I'm not really going to be able to connect to that information as well. I feel like I really want to create it so that I can make it just be more meaningful. And so I just love that aspect of teaching. And I know my family, that drives them nuts because it makes me work all the time. Mm. But I love it. It's what I get up in the morning and I'm ready to do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. In about 10 minutes, we'll join back again. Looking forward to a fantastic presentation from Sarah at 11 o'clock. And I've had messages from people who are having a hard time getting online. They're having issues with Zoom or their internet connections, and that's unfortunate. But I'm so grateful that you're here, and I am learning and gaining so much from you. So thank you so much, and see you in a few minutes.